Great, we're going to make a start. So welcome to everybody in the room and online. Welcome to this very special symposium that we have been organising for you today. I'm very excited to be here with our three speakers. I'm just going to say a little bit about the scheme that allowed us to bring them here. And I'm then going to pass over to Bronwyn Emerald, who's also going to give a short introduction, and then we will start with the papers themselves. So many of you will know that at CRASH we welcome visiting fellows from across the year, across the world, every year to come here to take part in events, to meet other people that are relevant to their research, to use the libraries and archives that we're very lucky to have available to us here. But this year starts a new initiative at CRASH, which is to create fully funded visiting fellowships for scholars from the Global South. And this is something we were extremely happy to be able to put into action. It's a really important new initiative for us because these scholars bring perspectives and experiences to us at CRASH and at Cambridge, without which our understanding of the world would be a lot poorer. So we're very happy to have them with us. We also hope that they will make connections and have conversations that will be really useful and stimulating to them too. And so each year CRASH is partnering with a different faculty or group around the university to bring these scholars here. And this year, the first year, we partnered with the Consortium for the Global South, which is represented here by Bronwyn, and I know a number of you in the room are also connected with that. And we aligned the call with one of their important research strands, which was Ecologies in Place. Next year, we're going to be partnering with the Faculty of Divinity here in Cambridge, and the call is already open, and it's on religious boundaries, so focusing particularly on interreligious relations in different regions of the world. I'm partly telling you this in the hope that you will be able to spread the news to all of your networks. The information is on the CRASH website, and it's been shared already on various different social media platforms. So if you could help us circulate that call in order to reach as many people as possible, we'd really appreciate that. But back to today's event, which I said we were very excited to be co-hosting with the Consortium for the Global South. I'm going to hand over to Bronwyn. Before that, I just want to say a very quick thank you to Adrián Lerner Patron, who's been very crucial in organising the event and pulling together the programme, to Nikki Davidovsky, who's not here, but she's managing the Zoom aspect, who's done a lot of work on this event as well, and obviously to our three speakers that we're looking forward to hearing from in a minute. So, Bronwyn, over to you.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks to Joanna for that introduction. We were very excited to be asked to be the partners for this year, and the Consortium for the Global South has this interest in Ecologies in Place, which is what our speakers are going to be talking about today. We are a consortium made up of the different area study centers, so Latin American studies, South Asian studies, African studies, as well as development and gender studies. And we're interested in thinking about sort of things like the Ecologies in Place stream or the Labor in Motion stream as ways of thinking across our different regional and disciplinary perspectives. And I think that the work you're going to see today is a really good example of the ways that working across these different regions, but also across different methodologies, can bring really fruitful new thinking to these problems and questions. And one of the things that we're particularly interested in the Consortium for the Global South is looking at the work that scholars are doing in the Global South, bringing them here, talking to them, interacting with organizations and institutions in the Global South, universities in the Global South, and not just having a view of, what can Cambridge bring to them, what can we do for people in the Global South, but also actually in a lot of places the innovations around these ideas about labor in motion, ecologies in place, are actually taking place in the Global South. And so the knowledge is being produced there, the innovations are being produced there, the thinking across these different kinds of disciplinary boundaries is happening there, and what can that teach us? So that's the sort of big quick overview of the Consortium for the Global South and what we're interested in. There are some brochures up at the front if you're interested in finding out more. And we have a website for those of you who are online, Cambridge Consortium for the Global South. So thank you again for coming along today, and thank you so much to our three speakers who've been really actively participating in the consortium so far this term, and especially thank you to Adrienne, who's our consortium Philomathia Fellow, who helped put all this together. So thank you.
I'd like to introduce the first speaker for today, Dr. Swati Matra. She's an assistant professor at the Department of English at Gurudas College, University of Calcutta. She has also taught undergraduate and postgraduate programs in New Delhi and Mumbai. Her areas of interest include book history and histories of readership, and 19th century studies and environmental history. She's a recipient of the Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship 2013 and the Sharp Research Development Grant for BPOC Scholars 2022. Thank you very much for being able to come here.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming here. Very, very grateful to Crash, Joanna, Bronwyn for introduction, Judith, Nikki, Adrienne. Thank you very much for putting this together. I will spare you the further introductions and get straight to my presentation. So, now this image is from September 2019. Early September 2019, the construction of Kolkata's East-West Underground Metro Railway, it hit a snag. A tunnel boring machine hit an aquifer, causing 2 buildings to collapse and causing further damage to at least 18 colonial-era buildings in an area called Bow Bazar. This was not to be the only time that this would happen. The area saw trouble again in May 2022, causing even more damage and displacement of residents. Experts have since recommended the razing of 45 houses that are close to 200 years old, on top of the 23 that have already been demolished. Now, as it turns out, as the experts panel from the Jadavpur University have pointed out, Bow Bazar once had a creek. Kathleen Bleckingden's History of Calcutta from 1905, titled Calcutta Past and Present, writes that one of the improvements, and I've underlined this, made in the town at the beginning of the 18th century was the filling up of as much of the creek as remained between the circular road and Wellington Square, which was then made, and laying a road along its course, which still bears the name it then received of Creek Road. Creek Road still exists. This creek ran underground from the river Ganga until it emerged to the surface at the city's administrative center at Dalhousie Square and continued eastwards all the way to the saltwater lakes at Biliaghata. The creek passed by, as per old Calcutta maps, I'll point you to them here, as per old Calcutta maps, an area called Dinga Bhanga, or the broken barge, called so because of a barge that was blown into the creek by the Great Cyclone of 1737. The same cyclone was also responsible for the silting of the creek. The saltwater lakes, of course, are now the reclaimed township of Salt Lake, where my parents now live. The creek and the broken barge have been erased from urban memory, reappearing only after the Metro Railways project caused this unexpected development, leading to very real distress and displacement in the city. So it is with Calcutta, now Kolkata, a city perennially coming to terms with its watery past, present and future. It is a city where, as Devjani Bhattacharya has pointed out, human intervention managed and radically transformed the slow movements of land and water in and around Kolkata since the turn of the 18th century. 21st century Kolkata's unreal estate, as Bhattacharya calls it, continues its tug of war with water. Water that logs parts of the city every monsoon, water that spills over from the choked, polluted, dying canals, water that disappears as groundwater levels deplete and aquifers dry up, water that gets contaminated every now and then. The rich, as Pratik Chakraborty has observed, access filtered water through their personal UV filters and ROs. Every rich home has them, including mine. The poor manage with municipal taps and the tanker mafia. Ponds and wetlands disappear to to improvement or to development, as we call it now, Unnoyon, as it once did to refugee movement after the partition of India, and to indiscriminate building practices, especially at the turn of the century. The wetlands shrink as the city expands eastwards, especially at the turn of the... and scientists, meanwhile, speak of a future where rising water levels put the city at risk. Torudutt, the poet who forms the primary focus of my current project, writes of her struggles with the city's watery origins in the Bengali quarters of Calcutta. In a letter dated August 7, 1876, I've put an excerpt there for you. The new drainage works, she says, which were finished in the Bengali quarter of the town last winter, have not succeeded thoroughly. At the first heavy showers of the rainy season, many of the streets gave way and went 4 or 5 feet below the level. There were several accidents in consequence of carriages and men going down with a plunge. Ritujyoti Bandyopadhyay has pointed out that in Calcutta in the 1870s, the engineering challenge that dominated discourses of street construction was the need for a more impervious surface foundation to prevent water from seeping into the subsoil. While it is improbable that our poet, Torudutt, was familiar with this discourse, her trials with the city's watery origins and the structuring of the Bengali quarters finds frequent mention in her letters to Mary Martin. I have a chunk of text here, I apologize for this, which I will not read out all of it, but the central theme here is the narrow, dirty roads, their lack of access to women of a station. I'll just read out this one line. For example, the streets are so dirty and narrow, one feels quite suffocated in them. The streets in the native quarter of Calcutta are so dirty, narrow and blocked up that it is a wonder to me how we get through them without some accident. The European part of the town is far better, though far inferior to some of the fashionable parts of London, so on and so forth. These statements, among other things, betray her caste and class origins. Women did frequent the dirty and narrow streets of the Bengali quarters, performing a wide variety of tasks in a number of professions, ranging from itinerant bookselling to prostitution. I mention prostitution because the Rambagan neighborhood in Calcutta was infamous for its red light quarters, a fact that Dutt is perhaps not entirely unaware of. As a daughter of the Rambagan Dutt household, Torudutt was a member of the city's Bengali elite. Despite their conversion to Christianity and subsequent estrangement with the caste Hindu elite. The statements, among other things, betray, I will return to this point in a bit, of course, but let me first elaborate on my project here. Debjani Bhattacharya, whose work I've quoted earlier, finds traces of the city's watery histories in the narratives and songs of the fishing communities of the Koivarto caste, narratives that, as Shubhra Saha has pointed out, form a part of the non-Brahminical literary histories that refuse to follow caste and were composed in a non-Sanskritic style, forms of composition that coexisted with the Sanskritized, erudite, rhetorically sophisticated styles and forms that have shaped the Bengali literary canon. Now, my interest in this project has been to find traces of the city's ecological transformation owing to human intervention in the English language poetry emerging out of the 19th century, a project made somewhat difficult by the fact that, and I'm quoting Zubir Kaul here because it's a lovely quotation, when British poets lived elsewhere, in North America, in the Caribbean, or as in this case in India, they still thought of themselves as writing for a metropolitan audience. And the metropolis was London, not Philadelphia or Kingston or Calcutta. More often than not, Kaul adds, when India shows up in the poetry of the gentleman poets stationed there, it is as a scenic backdrop against which they can stage the vignettes of history and morality that animate large tracts of 18th century British poetry in general. The Hooghly and the Ganges, for example, find frequent mention, as do themes drawn from Indian history and religion, such as in the poetry of Sir William Jones. Indian poets, writing in English in the 19th century, echoed and reworked some of these themes, especially those drawn from history and mythology, while working to develop a contemporary idiom of their own. Now, it bears emphasis that the Indian poets writing in English at this time were of markedly different origin and location than the marginal caste Koiborto poets of the city, or the marginal caste poets of Kubigan, Jatra, Keur, Kirtan that Shubhra Shaha and Priyanka Basu have written about. As scholarship that of, say, Mary Alice Gibson, Rosinka Choudhury, Jane Stafford have shown, early poetry in English coming out of India engaged with a wide range of themes. My current project concerns itself with a set of tropes in poetry that can be summed up by Nishit Ranjan Rai's very frustrated observation on tropes in history writing. He says that these histories of Calcutta, they tell the story of how Job Charnock, a block of rough British manhood, bodily as if lifted the city out of a marshy, unhealthy place on the river, how the settlement grew to be the center of a mighty empire and a city of palaces, how streets and squares were laid. Behind the entire facade built by the British writers, and following them the Indian authors, there lurks dim and distant the shadow of the Indian town in Calcutta and its inhabitants. Not only authors, but artists too treated the Indian town as out of bounds. The picture that emerges is largely of a colonial city par excellence, exotic and even bizarre. For example, this is an excerpt from City of Palaces. This is a poem by James Atkinson in 1824, which narrates the, it's a very long poem, but like this part because it narrates the emergence of culture in Calcutta, so to speak. It's talking about, Calcutta, what was thy condition then? An anxious forced existence in thy sight, embowering jungle and a noxious fen, fatal to many a bold aspiring wight. On every side tall trees shut out the sight, and like the upas, the poisonous trees, noisome vapors shed, day blazed with heat intense, and murky night brought damps successive, and a feverish bed. The revelers at eve were in the morning dead. It's quite an exaggeration, but you get the picture of what sort of narrative is being conveyed here. This is David Lester Richardson, responsible for educating a huge section of Calcutta's early Indian male poets in English.